I'm Jason Johnson in for Joy Reid, and we begin tonight with the walls of justice closing in on a twice impeached, twice indicted, liable for sexual abuse former president. Hours. 2.5 years after spearheading a months-long effort to overturn the 2020 presidential election, one that ended in a violent insurrection at the United States Capitol, Donald Trump is now almost certain to face criminal repercussions for his actions on and leading up to January 6, 2021. And new details suggest that this potential third indictment could be the most damning case against Trump yet. NBC News has learned that the target letter Trump received Sunday night from special counsel Jack Smith mentions 3 federal statutes. 3: conspiracy to defraud the United States, tampering with a witness, and deprivation of rights under color of law. And while sources tell NBC that Trump has no plans to talk to the grand jury, that's not stopping the investigators from moving full steam ahead. Tomorrow, William Russell, Trump's former White House aide, who also currently works for his 2024 campaign, is set to testify before the grand jury investigating these efforts. While earlier today, Jack Smith was spotted at a D.C. federal courthouse. And look, while this is all coming to a head, the former president also received some bad news today about another one of the criminal cases that he's facing. A judge rejected his bid to move the Manhattan DA's hush money case to federal court, meaning the trial will go on as scheduled in New York State. This is a lot. Joining me now to explain is Timothy Heaphy, former lead investigator for the House Select January 6th Committee, Jill Wine-Banks, former Watergate assistant, special prosecutor, MSNBC contributor, and co-host of the Sisters-in-Law podcast, and Lisa Rubin, MSNBC legal analyst. Tim, there's a lot here. So I'm just going to start with this. I had never, not being a lawyer, I hadn't really heard of this idea of a target letter, right? And it sounds at a practical level where it's just kind of like a legal version of a heads up. Hey, we're coming for you. What's the significance of a target letter going to Trump's team? And the fact that he has mentioned it, does that mean that he's the only one who got one, or could there be tons of people who've received these target letters?
Yeah, so it's significant, Jason, in terms of what it says about where the special counsel is. I don't think, however, it will end up being a significant step in the investigation. It's fairly common for prosecutors, before they make a final decision to ask a grand jury to return an indictment, to ask the target of that criminal investigation if he or she or it, if it's a company, has anything to add, anything to say that might bear upon the grand jury's deliberations. And that seems like what's happened here. The special counsel has told the former president, you're a target of a grand jury investigation, before the grand jury makes a decision on a proposed indictment. Do you have anything to say? So that's significant. It suggests that an indictment is likely coming. We've been talking about that for weeks, months now. The Select Committee recommended that the Justice Department evaluate criminal charges because the evidence would support one. But I don't think it's going to matter practically, because it seems as if the former president will not accept that invitation and will not provide any additional information.
Jill, this is the part that sort of seems curious to me. Look, if feds come to my house, if I get a target letter, look, if I get a phone call that just sounds too serious on my cell phone asking me if I'm happy with my cable bill, I'm going to show up wherever it is people are asking me to go. What is the significance and potential legal hassles that Trump has made for himself by all but saying, look, I'm not going to show up and talk to any grand juries? Is it just a reflection of the fact that he's ignorant and does not care? Is it the fact that his lawyers have told him there's nothing to be gained from going to a grand jury because we think that you're going to incriminate yourself? What's the significance of that, especially after receiving a letter like this?
You're right on your second guess. His lawyers have said, do not testify. You cannot help yourself. You will only hurt yourself. He's likely to commit perjury or to confess to more crimes. We've seen him do it time and time again. And he doesn't have to, and the grand jury cannot use his non-appearance as evidence against him, nor can a petit jury, a trial jury, use it against him. So there's no harm to him in not testifying, and there sure is a lot of danger if he were to come in and lie to them.
Lisa, I want to play you some sound from Trump at a town hall on another network with some other person last night and get your thoughts on the significance of what he's saying with these sort of impending charges.
I got the letter on Sunday night. Think of it. I don't think they've ever sent a letter on Sunday night. And they're in a rush because they want to interfere. It's interference with the election. It's election interference. Never been done like this in the history of our country, and it's a disgrace. The DOJ has become a weapon for the Democrats, an absolute weapon.
Lisa, one of the concerns that a lot of regular people have had out there is like, one, they felt that Merrick Garland took too long. They thought that the Department of Justice took too long. Because the idea was, hey, you want to bring these charges before Trump has announced he's going to run again. But there's sort of a counter argument that the guy wants to stay running for office as long as he can because he thinks it's his only way of staying out of legal trouble. What's the significance, if any? You know, is there any credibility to what Trump is saying? Is there any sort of way in which we can view this target letter or these ongoing investigations as having something to do with the impending election of 2024?
No, I don't think so, Jason. I think really, first of all, nobody really knows what's going on at the Department of Justice and the special counsel's office other than the people in it. And most of the information that we're getting right now, I would venture to guess, is coming from defense counsel or counsel for witnesses in the investigation and not from the special counsel's office. So I'll say that first and foremost. But the idea that this is being driven by political concerns on behalf of the Biden administration is as offensive to the special counsel's office as it is to you or me and many of our viewers. And that's because the people who are working this investigation are either career prosecutors who have been loaned out to the special counsel's office, who have no partisan affiliations at the DOJ. They're not political appointees, or they're people that Jack Smith had worked with previously and asked to come and be his deputies as part of this investigation. I don't think the election is driving the timing here, but with one concern, which is that they believe the American people deserve to see Donald Trump have a trial before the election so that they can make an educated decision about whether or not to vote for him. And they've said that in open court.
And that's interesting to me because I don't think there's anybody whose vote is going to be swayed one way or another by impending prosecutions. But Tim, I want to read you this sort of tear. This is from the New York Times. You know, the target letter to Trump raises the possibility of obstruction and fraud charges. Any charges in the District of Columbia where federal grand juries have been hearing evidence would raise additional legal peril for Mr. Trump. Already, the Justice Department has won guilty pleas or convictions in hundreds of cases related to the riot, suggesting that a pool of jurors may be less receptive towards him than in Palm Beach County, Florida, where he faces charges over his hoarding of sensitive government documents at his Mar-a-Lago estate. I got to ask you, Tim, we're talking about the president of the United States. Unless you have been living under a rock, unless you have been paying no attention to what's happening in this country, I don't think you can find a jury anywhere in the United States that doesn't know about this and may not have an opinion. Is that something that the Trump team is going to try and use to his defense? Or is he just going to try to venue shop one way or another and see if he can always put these trials in red states or red parts of blue states so he can cover for himself?
You see, neither side, Jason, can really forum shop. Criminal cases are brought in the jurisdiction in which the acts that give rise to those criminal charges occur. The Mar-a-Lago documents case was brought in Florida because his allegedly unlawful possession of those documents occurred in Florida. The obstruction of an official proceeding, which I continue to believe will be the lead count of a Jan 6 indictment, occurred in Washington. So the president, the former president, or the Justice Department cannot really control which pool of jurors hears the case. I don't think the special counsel cares. They'd try this case in front of 12 people who get in a jury box because they believe if they bring an indictment that they have the evidence to convict, whether that is in Florida or in D.C. or anywhere. They're not going to bring this case unless they are confident that they have proof beyond a reasonable doubt. So I think we spend a lot of time, lawyers spend a lot of time gaming out jury pools and where is or isn't favorable. In my experience, jurors follow the instructions of the court, pay close attention to evidence, and generally follow those instructions and issue verdicts that are consistent with the facts and the law. That's going to happen wherever this case is brought.
Jill, I got to ask you this, because this is one part that's always been interesting to me. As an American citizen, it's always concerned me to a certain extent that juries have to be filled with people who don't have opinions on things that it frightens me that they don't have opinions on, because it sort of suggests sometimes you haven't been paying attention. What do you think a jury selection process might be like in a place like Washington, D.C., where this terrorist attack and riot took place? I can imagine Trump's defense striking pretty much everybody, because you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone in Washington, D.C. who wasn't directly or indirectly affected by January 6th, even if it just meant I got to work late that day. How do you think that process is going to game out?
I don't think it's going to matter. I agree with what Tim said about juries taking seriously their obligation. They listen to the evidence, they listen to the instructions, and the instructions say you have to decide based on the evidence in this courtroom. That led a Trump juror to convict Manafort, or to vote to convict Manafort on all counts. And I think that will happen here too. The standard is not whether you have an opinion. The standard is whether you can set aside the opinion and vote based on only the evidence in the courtroom. It would be impossible to find anyone in this country who doesn't have an opinion, because if you did, you are right, Jason, you wouldn't want that person on the jury. They would have been living under a rock, because there's no one who doesn't know what's going on here. So it's just a question of someone being honest in answering, saying, yes, I will vote on the evidence. Yes, I will set aside my opinion that I have formed before coming to this court.